attempts to establish and set dates for the end of this world is well-known practice among Christians. The history of the Christian church has witnessed many different attempts to establish the date for the time of the end of this world history, and many different proposals have been made when actually that end might be. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has not been spared of such a practice. The history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church has witnessed different attempts by some individuals who argued that on the basis of some biblical texts and biblical prophecies, actually we can clearly discover the exact date when the second coming of Christ will take place, and different dates of the events that will take place preceding the second coming of Christ. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has regularly distanced itself of all such attempts. However, many individuals have really secured good financial fortune because of all those dates that were established that really caused sensationalism and excitement among believers, and all those who accepted those proposals at the end were left disappointed and discouraged, because as you can already guess, nothing happened with all those dates that were suggested and established. In these and the following two presentations, we want to address that issue and to get the answer, what is true about the date setting, and what does the Bible and also the writings of Ellen White are telling us about that. And in this presentation, we will go with something that is very fundamental to the date setting. And this is the so-called the cosmic week. The cosmic week is a concept that an understanding of the length of this world history is actually related to the creation week. And in actuality, the 6 days of creation are related to the 6-year period of this world history. One day would stand or represent 1,000 years. 6 days, 6,000 years as the length of this world history, which would be followed by the 7,000 year, like in the creation week, the 7-day Sabbath. And this 7,000 year is the millennium of peace, of rest, as it is portrayed in the book of Revelation in chapter 20. So the proponents of the cosmic week, they argue that actually the conclusion of 6,000 years as the length of this world history marks the end, when God will come, when Jesus Christ, the second coming of Christ will mark the conclusion of this world history. So they further argue that actually we can know exactly when this will take place. We can know the exact date of the conclusion of this 6,000-year period. But how? In order that we can calculate and know the date of the conclusion of this 6,000-year period, we must first know the exact date of the creation week. So many attempts have been made in order to establish the exact date of the creation week as portrayed on the first pages of the Bible. In my knowledge, according to my knowledge, the earliest attempt to establish the date of the creation week is expressed in the Jewish tradition, according to which the creation week took place in the year 3060 or 3760 or 3761 BC. So now you simply add 6,000 years and you get the date 2240, which would mark the end of this period. This is just, in my knowledge, the earliest attempt to establish the date of the creation week. And many different attempts has been made, probably in the last 200-300 years. For instance, Robert Young, in his well-known analytical concordance in the first edition, he lists 37 dates proposed for the creation of the world or the creation of man, 37. And he adds that in the 19th century, those dates were not less than 120. And he argued even possible 300 different dates. So now you can see how many different proposals have been made. So 6,000-year period. The proponents of this cosmic week, they argue that this concept is biblical, but the problem is the 6,000-year period is not mentioned in the Bible. It's not found anywhere in the Bible. So then what are the biblical texts that the proponents of the cosmic week, so-called cosmic week, actually are using? There are actually 4 texts. These are 4 basic texts. There are many other texts, less significant, but these are 4 the most significant texts. 2 from the Old Testament and 2 the New Testament. The first text is the book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verses 2 to 7. And if you have your Bibles, if you can join me, you can see that in this text we have the description of the so-called the land's sabbatical rest on the 7th year. As God instructed the people of Israel through Moses, they were supposed to cultivate the land for 6 years and to have a harvest. However, on the 7th year, they were not supposed to cultivate the land, and the land had to rest for the 7th year. So there was no the exploitation of the field. So the proponents of this view, they say that those 6 years actually parallel 6,000 years of rebellion and sin against the Creator. So that 7th sabbatical year, actually it's related to the 1,000 year of the millennium. But I'd like to invite you that you look into the text yourself and to show to me where in the Bible we have that 1 year stands as a symbol now for 1,000 years. What in the text actually points to 6,000 year period followed by the 7,000 year, the millennium of the book of Revelation chapter 20. There is nothing in the text that points to that. The next text, the Old Testament text, is found in Psalm 94, and the text says, "For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday, when it is past, and like a watch in the night." There is nothing here in this text that would suggest any idea of 1,000 years for each day of the creation, which would really make 6,000 years in total as mankind's total history. There is nothing in the text. Now we are moving to the New Testament. And it's 2 Peter chapter 3:8, which somehow parallels Psalm 94. And probably Peter, in writing these words, he had in mind Psalm 94. And Peter said, "But beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day." You'll notice here, nothing in the text says that 1 day symbolizes 1,000 years. Actually, what Peter is saying, that for God, 1 day of waiting to come in the second coming of Christ, it's like waiting for 1,000 years. Even though before God, 1,000 years is as 1 day. You'll notice there is nothing in the text that points to any symbolism and to tell us that 1 day of the creation week actually symbolizes 1,000 years, pointing to 6,000 years as the history over the planet Earth. And now the second text in the New Testament, it's as you can guess, the book of Revelation chapter 20:1-3. What the text says, John is telling us, "And I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit, and a great chain is in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little while." Again, as we can see, no 6,000 year is mentioned. The millennium is mentioned, but doesn't say that the millennium will proceed with 6,000 year period as the age, as the period of this world history. There is no any association with the 6 days of the creation and the weekly rest on the 7th day. These are the texts, and it's upon you to conclude about the validity of these texts to establish the cosmic week. So if the 6,000 year period is not mentioned in the Bible, where did it come from? And we must say that it came from the Jewish extra-biblical literature, apocryphal literature, or if you want really to be more precise, it's a Jewish pseudo-epigraphic Jewish literature, in particular the work known as the Slavonic Enoch, or a second Enoch, that was written somewhere in the 1st century AD. According to this book, Enoch was taken to heaven to be caught there and to be shown the secrets of the universe so that he could teach his children. And among those secrets, he was instructed of the 6,000 years. And the author argued that there was going to be equivalence between the literal days of the creation week with 6 or 7 periods of 1,000 years as the total length of this world history. The 6,000 years of labor and toil and rebellion against God would be followed by 1,000 years of rest and peace. And at the end of this period, the gates of the eternity would be opened for the redeemed. So you can see, it was for the first time that appeared among the Jews in the pseudo-epigraphal literature. The first Christian work that actually mentioned the idea of 6,000 years as the period of this world history is the so-called Epistle of Barnabas, or Pseudo-Barnabas, which is actually the Christian apocryphal work that was written and came into existence somewhere between the year 70 and 150 AD. So it is apocryphal book that was not accepted by Christians. Okay? Apocryphal work. In that book, we read the following: "Give heed, children, to what this means. He ended in 6 days." He meant this, that in 6,000 years the Lord shall bring all things to an end. For the day with him signifies 1,000 years. And this he himself bears me witness, saying, "Behold, the day of the Lord shall be 1,000 years. Therefore, children, in 6 days, that is in 6,000 years, everything shall come to an end. And then after that, the millennium will come." So this is the first Christian reference. Did not come from the Bible. It came from the Christian apocryphal work. Somehow this concept very soon became popular among early Christians. So it was adopted by many Christian writers. Among the first one that we know, it was Irenaeus, toward the end of the 2nd century and beginning of the 3rd century. Then we have, it was accepted by Hippolytus, Lactantius, Ambrose of Milan, then Jerome in the 5th century. It was accepted by Augustine in the 5th century. And actually, Augustine, church father, was primarily responsible for spreading that concept among the Christians. His writings were very, very influential. And he actually made a great impact, and he was the main source for James Usher, the author of those famous annals or biblical chronology, as we will see a little bit later. Other Christian writers of the medieval period accepted it. So also the Talmud and some other Christian interpreters. Reformation, Martin Luther accepted it, and some other reformers like Latimer, Christopher Colombo accepted this concept, and some others. I have all of them here, and I will actually place this on my Facebook. So if you want to check this for yourself, you can see it. Now it brings us to the Millerite movement. During some time, actually, William Miller believed that the 6,000 years were going to conclude in the year 1843. And he established his view on the Jewish reckoning. There's some other people we can mention, including some Protestant authors, and their books were found in Ellen White's library. But in particular, the very influential chronology of James Usher, who concluded that the world would come to its end at the closing of the 19th century. So let's make a conclusion here. The 6,000-year period is not mentioned at all in the Bible. This theory actually originated among the Jewish writers of the intertestamental period. It appeared for the first time among Christians in the apocryphal work. It was accepted by the church father and actually established itself permanently in Christianity. Many authors during the medieval period, during the time of Reformation, they accepted, they spread that concept, and actually even more today, this concept has been accepted as the prophetic. And by the way, in more recent time, we have South American Seventh-day Adventist. He took the cosmic week and on the basis which actually he reached the conclusion, and now he's promoting this among Seventh-day Adventists, that actually Jesus' return would come at the end of this cosmic week, which will be in the year 2027. So Jesus would come that year, and he even allows that it can happen even a little bit earlier. So you will notice there is no, in any proposal or argument of the cosmic week, so says the Lord. There is no any such argument to support the 6,000 year as the prophetic period. And there is no any argument that is actually derived from the Bible of the writings of Ellen White. Please, let me repeat one more time. Biblically speaking, there is no such prophetic period mentioned in the Bible. But now, for us as Seventh-day Adventists, another important question arises. But Ellen White referred to the 6,000 year period. So what to say to that? In order to address that issue, we have to keep in mind three things. Number one is, we will see it in the next presentation, that Ellen White repeatedly discouraged all time-setting attempts. She did not believe in the time setting. Second thing is, Ellen White believed that any prophetic time in the Bible was finished in the year 1844. And she reached that conclusion rightly on the basis of Revelation chapter 10, verse 6. If you remember that mighty angel who made that pronouncement that the time, chronos, will not be any longer, which actually Ellen White rightly concluded that the message of the angel, there will not be established prophetic period any longer beyond the year of 1844. And number three, Ellen White never claimed to be an authority on history or chronology. And any calculation concerning the time or date for the return of the Lord based on the statement about 6,000-year period would be wrong by using Ellen White writings. It will be completely against anything that Ellen White wanted to say, and we will see it in our third study that we will have regarding this subject. But here we have not addressed yet about Ellen White's use of 6,000-year period in her writing. So please let us just take a few moments with regard to that. In her published writings, there are about 50 references to 6,000-year period. But as you know that Ellen White many times repeated her statement in some other published or unpublished articles or in her books. So really about 20 references, original references to the 6,000-year period are really found in her writings, about 20. And I would like you now that you can see here, I have here on 3 pages here in front of me, and I will put it on Facebook beneath this video. And you will be able to see for yourself how actually Ellen White used and employed this 6,000-year period in her writings. What I have decided to do, I wanted to take those more than 20 original references in her writings to 6,000-year period and put them chronologically, and then we can detect something that is very interesting. So please, as I told you, I have here, you'll be able to see for yourself here. The first time Ellen White referred to the 6,000-year period in the year 1864. I hope you can remember that date, 1864. And she talks that this world is now about 6,000 years old. That's what she said. About 6,000 years old in the year 1864. Then 4 years later, she used the expression nearly 6,000. 4 years later, in 72, she said for 6,000. 3 years later, for 6,000. 2 years later, in 1877, 6,000 years, this arch enemy has been warring against the government of God. 4 years later, in 1881, she used again the expression, for 6,000 years. 3 years later, she used the expression, almost 6,000 years, almost. Then in 87, she used the expression, for 6,000 years. A year later, 1888, for 6,000 years. In 1890, for 6,000 years. And now please pay attention, the same year, 1890, she uses the expression, over 6,000 years. And now it brings us to the last original reference. It was found, she referred to that in the year 1913. Please pay attention. In 1980, over 6,000 years. In 1913, nearly 6,000 years. 50 years. The first time she referred about 6,000 years. Then for 1,000 years. Nearly 6,000. Now she says, then over 6,000 years. 2 times. Now she says, nearly 6,000 years. And it was toward the end of her life. Today, we live about more than 100 years later. And people are using those arguments to show that Ellen White pointed that today this world is 6,000 years old. 100 years later, or 150 years later, from the time when, for the first time, she made reference to this period. So please, let's make summary one more time. It appears that Ellen White did not use 6,000 year period in the same way. She used it as a round number, about 6,000 years, nearly 6,000 years, for 6,000 years, for over 6,000 years, for more than 6,000 years, for over 6,000 years, for over 6,000 years, and for nearly 6,000 years. Last statement in 1930. I believe that this chronological trace of the way how Ellen White referred to the 6,000 years period, it really shows to us that Ellen White really never tried to use 6,000 year period that today we can use to establish the 6,000 year period of this earth history when Jesus will come. So the question is, when did Ellen White get this figure of 6,000 year period? One thing we know, as we mentioned already, how Robert Young documented the time of Ellen White. There are more than 100 different suggestions of the creation of this world, and common among most Protestants was the view that actually this earth, the age of this earth, was 6,000 years old. But we know today that actually all Ellen White concept, the most significantly, was borrowed from the book of chronology by James Usher that we referred earlier, that was influenced by Church Father Augustine. And James Usher was a famous Archbishop or Arnold in England. in the 17th century. He was very influential, and his book on chronology was so popular for a long time that actually his chronology appeared in the margins of most of the Bible versions in English, especially in the writings of Ellen White. And according to Usher, the world was created in the year 4004. And when we go to Ellen White writings, we can find more than 2,000 chronological references to Usher. She followed Usher in counting the chronology. So we can conclude it is not possible really to establish exactly when the world was created, when the creation week took place, and when the life on this place, on this planet came into the existence. Because the biblical chronological informations are not enough for its exact dating. For biblical chronologies are much theologically focused. Any calculation of history and historical dates before Abraham is uncertain and vague. So please, I just want to conclude our studies with two observations. Number one, we already saw that Ellen White actually never claimed to be authority on history. This was very much established and well stated by her younger son, William White, in the year 1911. You know, in 1911, Adventist World Witness, the final edition of Ellen White's book, Great Controversy, and this edition suffered many historical dates that were changed than found in the previous edition. Many Adventists were confused and many questions were raised. Ellen White at that time was in California. She was an aged person. There are no planes to fly to the east. So she sent her son W.C. White. And actually W.C. White explained to General Conference. He said, Mother has never claimed to be authority in history. The things which she has written out are descriptions of flashlight pictures and other representations given her regarding the actions of man and the influence of these actions upon the work of God for the salvation of man. And then he explains, when she had to write down these views, she has made use of good and clear historical statements to help make plain to the readers the things she is endeavoring to present. So, if you go to the book, Volume 3, Selected Messages, page 437, and you go pages 446 to 450, and all those pages, you can see there is a lot there. You can see how W.C. White explained to Adventists that they cannot take Ellen White writings as the authoritative in order to prove history, because those days Ellen White never received in a vision. She got it from the best historical sources of her time. But later Ellen White realized that some of those dates that she got from those historical sources were not accurate. So she was eager actually to revise it. And that's why W.C. White says, my mother, she never thought that Adventists would take her writings in order to settle some issues on the dates and chronology. So we have to be very careful how we use the writings of Ellen White. So when we are talking about dates and chronology, 6,000 years belongs to that category. We cannot use the writings of Ellen White to prove 6,000 years as the age of the planet Earth, as the period of this Earth history, in order to calculate and to establish the date of the time of the end. But many people say, no, but we can establish the date on the basis of the biblical chronology. Because by calculating carefully the biblical chronology, we can really establish the age of the planet Earth and the history of this world in the terms of 6,000 year period. Actually, I want to present here something to you that is the result of research of many faithful Adventist scholars. They invested a lot of time in order to investigate and to search the topic and to get the answer to those difficult questions that we have. And please, what is that they discovered? I have here, and I'm putting here in front of you, you can see for yourself. We all know that the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. So there is the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. Okay? And that was the Bible during the New Testament times that was read and used in the synagogue. However, in the 3rd century BC, on the request of the library in Alexandria, according to the Jewish tradition, 70 Jewish scholars, they translated the Hebrew Bible from the biblical text into Greek. And that translation is not Septuagint, which means 70, with reference to those 70 Jewish scholars who were allegedly involved in translating this Bible into the Greek language. So the Septuagint. But also, during the New Testament times, Samaritans, they had their own Bible. And I just want one more time to put here before you, and you can see here the first MT, this is Masoretic text. This is the Hebrew Bible. Then the second one is the Septuagint, one version. And then you have the second Septuagint, the second version. Then you have Samaritan text. And then you have the Jewish historian Josephus, who was contemporary of Apostle Paul. And now you can see, according to the Hebrew text, from the time of Adam to Noah, we have the time period of 1656 years. But then when you go to the Septuagint, it's 22 and 62. And then you can see second version of Septuagint, but then you can see Samaritan Pentateuch, and you can see Josephus. And keep in mind that the Septuagint was the Bible of the early church. Paul preached from that Bible. Early Christians, they preached and they spread the gospel. The book of Revelation quotes from the Septuagint. But then you can go also here, you can see from Adam to Abraham, according to the Hebrew Bible, we have that expired almost 2,000 years, 1948. But when you go to the Septuagint, it's 3,334. So which of these chronologies is correct? Is it the Bible that It's in Hebrew text that was read in the synagogue, used in the synagogue? Or is it the Bible that was used by early Christians to spread the gospel to the world? Now, in the light of what we just said, there is one thing we can conclude, that biblical chronology is not reliable. We can trace chronology up to Abraham, but prior to the time of Abraham, we are not able to establish any chronology. And no wonder if you have 10 chronologies done by 10 people, you will see the different dates. And this is what Paul had in mind when he wrote to his two co-workers, Timothy and Titus. And he warned them, he cautioned them, he instructed them. So we read the first text in 1 Timothy 1:4. So Paul wrote to Timothy, don't occupy yourself with the myths and endless genealogies, which promote speculations rather than the divine training that is in faith. And writing to to Titus, in Titus 3:9, Paul wrote, but avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, contentions, and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and futile. Paul knew the problems about chronologies. And Paul knew that Christians could take Septuagint to argue against the Jews with regard to the Hebrew text. And nobody could establish the true genealogy. So Paul wrote to his co-workers, he says, don't be involved in debates, in controversies over chronologies, because we don't have the truth. It will not strengthen anybody's faith. This will be just a foolish controversies. So my brothers and sisters, in the conclusion of these studies, I believe that we all agree, as we could see, that the so-called cosmic week does not come from the Bible. It really comes from the Jewish extra-biblical sources. In Christianity, for the first time, appeared in Christian apocryphal literature. It was accepted by church fathers and was spread and promoted during the medieval period, during which the Christians did not follow the clear teaching of the Bible, but interpreted the Bible within the allegorical approach. And this cosmic week was really established on very speculative analysis, interpretation, which cannot be supported from the Bible. The conclusion, I simply want to ask you a question. How is that the Protestants, who criticized the Roman Catholic Church, that actually did not follow the Bible, they followed the Christian traditions, those very Protestants accepted this 6,000-year concept, this cosmic week, they accepted it as something that did not come from the Bible, but it came really from the tradition that was common to the Roman Catholic Church. But now we are going one step further. What can we say about Seventh-day Adventists? That we Seventh-day Adventists, we say the Bible and the Bible only. At the same time, some Adventists are holding the view that does not come from the Bible. It cannot be verified from the Bible. And there is no any evidences that this concept comes from any clearly stated biblical text. Actually, it's something that comes from extra biblical sources of Jewish tradition. How is possible that many Adventists are actually taking this concept, and based on this concept of this cosmic week, they establish the date of the second coming of Christ? They're promoting, believing. Many attempts in the past were proven wrong. Now we have a new date, 2027. And my brothers and sisters, all what we can expect, that all those who accept and follow those teachings will have their faith tested. As the result will be disappointed in discouragement. And many people, because of that, they reject the biblical prophecies because of their wrong interpretation of the Bible and biblical prophecies. In our following two presentations, we will go to Matthew 24, and we will see in the words of Jesus. Then after that we will turn to the writings of Apostle Paul, which try to understand about what the New Testament is telling us about setting the date of the end of the world, which will be characterized by the second coming of Christ in power and glory. May God bless us all.